Okay, thanks, Heather.
Thanks, Josh.
All right, I'm going to call the meeting to order at 6:33. Two things. I just wanted to say that the high school meeting ended early. We have an executive session on our agenda. We utilized the time. We opened up an AOS meeting and went immediately into executive session for about 23 minutes. Close that out. We still need to go into executive session to finish that out at the end of our regular meeting. And so now I've officially opened the AOS meeting. The next thing I need to do is to confirm board members' attendance and voting. Town of Mount Desert, if you don't mind, I'm going to skip us because Todd's here. I see Teresa's on the screen and I know our voters. So if you, when I call your name, let me know whether you're here and or if you're voting, please. Dwayne Bolt.
Here voting.
Robin Sue Tapley.
Here voting.
Marie Yarborough.
Here, not voting.
Lily Simas.
Here voting.
Christy LaSquadra.
Here voting.
Okay. John Bench.
Here voting.
Susan Allen.
Here voting.
John Eisenhower. Ingrid Kashmar.
Here voting.
Jim Sawyer.
Here voting.
Heidi Lawson. Jessica Stewart.
Here voting.
Jessica Bass. Carrie Hayes.
Here voting.
And Roger Santamon. Jennifer Vanilla. Gary Burr.
Here voting.
Tom Reeve is remote. Darcy Throckmorton.
Here voting.
Aaron Brown. Tammy Tripler. I don't see Tammy yet. I don't think we have any of the others.
Tammy's here.
Oh, Tammy's there, okay.
She's just muted.
Okay, great. All right, a voucher, or the DocuSign voucher went around earlier. So then moving on to minutes, I'll take the motion for the approval of the September 21, 2020 minutes. Okay, Ingrid, any questions or comments? All right, those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Unanimous. Any public comment? All right, we're seeing none. We will move on to the superintendent's report.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening and thank you. I'd like to follow up on a few items that came up at the last meeting. First is the SOP, or the Standard Operational Procedure. I just wanted to make sure that folks were aware that that has been posted to the website, that's been released to staff and families, and that information basically walks through our alignment with Maine CDC and the Maine Department of Education in terms of how we as an individual school or schools or district would proceed in the event if and when we had a positive case either with a student, a staff member, and or both. And those protocols are in alignment, as I said, with CDC and state guidelines. So we've communicated that. In addition, it was brought up at the high school meeting, just as a side note, school closure information that might be weather related. I'll talk about that in a bit. So it's different than a COVID related case. Transition to remote learning plans. Those building-based plans have been developed by each individual principal and building-based team. And those pieces, or that piece of information was released to both staff and families. If there are any questions about any of those plans, please reach out to that building principal or school because they are tailored for each individual school. And that framework, again, is subject to change depending on circumstances and will be updated. The templates that were shared with communities is a broad or a macro template, but in the event that we have to move into a closure, there'll be specific details released. It could be a window of anywhere from 1 to 3 days during a transitional period, but our goal would be the quickest transition possible. Positive cases or contract tracing protocol. Folks are wondering how we would proceed. And just to remind everybody, in the event of a positive case, either with a student or a staff member, we follow the main CDC guidelines. And contact tracing would begin with guidance through main CDC. One thing we are going to do, and I'm going to float this out to the administrative team and the nurses both, I think it's important that we do a sandbox exercise. If you're not familiar with a sandbox exercise, in fact, in essence, it's a drill. And not that anybody needs anything more to do, but we thought it's very important we get out in front, and we're simply going to put we're going to put our schools into a box or a hat, and we're going to draw out 2 schools, positive student case drill, positive staff member case drill, go through our protocols to make sure that we're in alignment, and then take a step back, do a round table and see what we did well, see what the gaps were, if any, and be ready in the event or when we have to institute those protocols, we'll be better prepared to do so. Testing. I released a document to the AOS board this afternoon and the administrative team and the staff regarding our revised testing protocol with our test kits that we presently have that have been donated by the Jackson Laboratory. We've worked very, very closely with the hospital, with the Jackson Lab and the Down East COVID-19 Task Force, which meets weekly. And based upon primarily the fact that we have no evidence of community transmission at this time, and the fact that those resources that we have in place, we want to make sure that we use them strategically. What has been advised, and we concur with that recommendation, is that we use those test kits in the event that we see a positive case in a school or in our district, and we begin that testing protocol and using that framework to utilize those test kits in that way. I'll stop there. I don't know whether you've had the chance to digest the memo, but if there's any questions about that, I can take any now, or I can certainly take any as a follow-up later. Anything on the revised testing? Carrie, please.
When I was reading that, I was thinking it certainly is important if we have a positive test in the school. Is that?
So, yeah.
Okay. But I also think it's important if we start to.
Beginning of the question.
Okay. When I was reading it, I was thinking that it certainly is important if there's a positive test in the school, but also if we start to see community spread, I would think that would be an indicator for us to start the asymptomatic, and not just necessarily in our community, but in surrounding communities based on, parents or spouses of teachers who might be working in Bangor or places like that. So I don't know if there's any opening to kind of revise that for what would kick off the start of the asymptomatic testing.
I think the short answer is yes. I mean, it's fluid enough where we would take guidance from medical professionals, the doctors, and the people at MDI Hospital in the lab. And certainly in the event of any community spread or any community transmission, or looking at the data, if it's elevated in our county, we would go back and look at that. Okay. Yep. Anyone else on testing? I do plan to release this tomorrow to parents and families, so if there are any questions about that, and to that point, Carrie, we're going to be prepared to make adjustments in that area. Additionally, we are still working on identifying additional funds. I found out that a community to the south of us is doing asymptomatic testing of their school employees. They're doing it through a grant that they received through the state. So my question at this point now is that, can some of those grant monies follow or come to our community, and would we be able to use those grant monies to support additional testing? So still working on that piece. Okay. CRF funds, I can't say this enough, but boy, oh boy, we're fortunate to have Nancy Thurlow and her team. I'll start off by saying, if folks don't know, We've had 2 rounds of CRF funding. CRF, the acronym is Corona Relief Funds. Now, I'm going to be careful as I say this, but the time frame that we and all schools have been given is, it's a very short window for a significant amount of work. And when we talk about Corona Relief Funds, it's important, and I know you all know this, but for the public, talking to superintendents that are very stressed about putting these applications in, I get it, but we don't put in one application. We are putting in multiple applications. Every one of our schools had to submit an application. And the principals and Nancy, I tip my cap to them because they met the deadline. And what that means is we have our applications in and they were approved for round 1. Round 2 came with slightly elevated amounts, and they're different for each school. And we had a very short window, 2 weeks, to turn that application around. And once again, our principals and Nancy met that deadline. So we're not out of the woods yet, because even though we've been approved for these funds, it is not like we're receiving an appropriation or a check or money. It's a reimbursement model. So you put in your application, you're approved for the use of the funds. You have to purchase the materials or the programs or spend the money in total before December 30th of 2020. And if you don't, you lose the funds, number 1. And number 2, it is a reimbursement model. So even though we've applied for the funds, been approved, we have to submit the voucher or the invoice and then wait to see if that's approved as well. And let me stop there. Nancy, anything to add on CRF 1 or 2 at this point?
We did CRF 2, part of our schools are approved so far. They're still in the process of reviewing those at the state. So we had a few adjustments that I had to make today, and we should hear hopefully in the near future about approval for the rest of the schools.
So Nancy, just quick summary on CRF 1. What was the total allocation for all the schools? And we can send a spreadsheet out on each individual school to the local boards. But the total amount for CRF round 1
was $1,458,000, and CRF 2 was $1,537,000.
So I think without getting into too many of the weeds on that, it'll be important to do reconciliation at the local board meetings. And we will do that. And I'll ask the principals to give you an overview at the meeting when we do that breakdown of what they have geared those funds towards. Christy?
Well, so I was gonna say, can you just give a brief list on what you can use that money for? Because
Sure.
it's very strict, right?
Yep. Nancy, you want to give just maybe a generic overview, and then Julie, if you want to jump into on what some of those requests have been.
Between the 1 and 2, there's been like PPE is a big one. Modifications like for HVAC or something like that for your buildings. Fans, air purifiers, some salaries and bennies for either virtual academy or subs because of replacing some staff, additional hours for support staff. Materials, learning materials and all of this is in addition to your budget. You can't supplant your budget, you have to supplement it. So it's monies for things that weren't planned on in your budget.
It has to be, as Nancy said, we can't supplant, and we have to show that any monies we spend are directly related to COVID. And staffing, a point of clarification, that's a real tricky one for us. I mean, I know Julie's been pulling her hair out along with, well, I don't have any hair to pull out, but Nancy. And the tricky one on that is we cannot commit any resources beyond December 30th. So it's really tied our hands. And that's been a difficult one. So you'll get a summary, individual boards to see how those principals have geared those funds. Christie?
I was gonna say, I read an article today about how Maine principals across Maine are struggling to be able to spend these funds with the restrictions. So I'm hoping, I guess, that the deadline will get extended, but then of course I think they're gonna end up having a lot of money left over because people can't spend it. So I would hope that we would get around 3 or an extension,
Yeah.
and we find out soon, so that we could, make these commitments that we need to make.
I may anticipate in the second week of November, we might learn more, but who knows? Anybody else on CRF 1 or 2? So again, Nancy, thank you, because I'm just amazed that we were able to get that stuff in. Appreciate everything you're doing.
Yeah, thank you to Nancy and your principals.
We continue to network with a number of entities, Down East COVID-19 Task Force, the DOE, the superintendents regionally, we meet weekly. So know that there are many, many meetings that continue to occur so that we can network and make sure that we're working towards alignment to the best we can, both within our district and regionally. I also continue to meet weekly with the nurses and the principals. That's been really important, specifically for building-based teams and information that we're trying to vet, or that we are vetting in terms of safety of staff and students. Guidelines are changing, so it's important that those folks that we meet on a regular basis to update any handbooks or any information. So if you ever have any questions that we need to vet through the nurses or the principals, know that we're meeting each week. PPE status continues to be updated. We have a spreadsheet for each building. One of the things we're trying to nail down is burn rate. And what I mean by burn rate is how frequently are we using these materials, and to what capacity. And it's been difficult right now because we've only gone through a couple of cycles. So it's in terms of checking the inventory. And the inventory it's not whether it's in the classroom, it has to be in a locked or secured facility and non-distributed. And we're also looking at how we can augment those resources because we are starting to hear that there are materials that are becoming harder to get. But I will note that we have a healthy supply on hand. Our goal is to have at least a 30-day supply at all times. And I want to give a shout out to the hospital because masks were donated from MDI Hospital, and we just distributed another 10,000 masks. So that's really helpful for us. Inclement weather was brought up at the high school meeting, and tomorrow during our admin meeting. We're very conscious that we don't want to wait for snow. We know that the last couple of years we've seen significant wind events, and so we want to be ready. And the assumption by many will be, well, we're in a pandemic, we're doing remote learning, we should be able to do that like that. That's true probably from grade 8 through the high school with regard to computers, but we need to make sure that for our children in the elementary levels and the individual buildings that we're prepared so that if we cannot have school due to weather or other contingencies, that we can do remote learning or what that will look like at the building level. So we'll be working on that this week and have information both for the board and for parents very soon on that. And lastly, operations and logistics. It continues to be something that comes up. I know the board's well aware of that. I had hoped to be able to announce that I was going to contract a service, bring an individual on board that can support that immediately. And we're still going to work to do that. But at this point, I think as superintendent, I can't wait for relief for our principals anymore. So I'm going to be taking on networking with our custodians and maintenance crews to coordinate maintenance services to make sure that things like PPE, cleaning supplies, and all the buildings are having consistent conversations in terms of how we can network for greater purchasing power, but make sure that we don't have situations where we have haves and have-nots. So I'll work with the custodians on that so that that can come off building principals' plates right now. Also, if there are things that are project-based or things that are needs in specific buildings that I can help and liaise and come in and offer some support so that that's not something principals have to deal with directly. In addition, I'll be meeting with the principals tomorrow, and I'll have some information shortly on what we're going to do in that regard with transportation. And I'm also going to be networking with our food service folks to facilitate conversations with them on a regular basis until we can identify somebody that can take that on. In short, what I want to say to the board and to the community, I'm very conscious of the time we're in. I'm very conscious of the economy that we're in and will be in. But I think it goes without saying that never before than now have we realized the vulnerabilities of the AOS. And so it should be no surprise when the board sees at least a request for me to bring operation and logistical support in the next budget. So that'll be a focal point along with a couple of other pieces. Happy to take any questions on that or any other items any board member may have. Good?
You want to come down to this
Oh,
microphone?
sure.
Yeah.
I just want to throw my support for putting that logistics position back into the budget for the next cycle. Because I think we've seen through this that our admin can't be educational leaders. They're having to own too many of these other things. And the education piece is more difficult now during COVID. And so putting that into your AOS budget, spreading that out over, the multiple schools, it's, when we look at that cost to each of our schools, I think it's money very well spent.
Thank you, Ingrid. Anyone else? If I may, Heather, I'm going to turn it over to Julie. Julie, do you want this or you want to come up here? Oh, hang on.
Look, everybody else.
So off for being safe here.
Good evening, everybody. I have a very quick presentation, just updating you on several things. I want to update you on the anti-racism task force to add to what Matt said. Talk very briefly about assessment, the virtual academy program, some feedback from the October 8th, 9th professional days, and just a couple of words about the effects we're seeing on parents, families, teachers, and administrators because of the time we're in. None of which will be a surprise to any of you. So to add to what Matt talked about, during the high school board meeting, the anti-racism task force is up and running. It's met twice. The next meeting will be determining the priorities for the year. The task force agreed together that in order to feel efficacious and like we could show that things got done, we need to whittle down that list so that we can focus on a couple of, we're going to choose 3 things and then divide into sub-teams and be able to move things forward. I was asked by Mark to be the interim co-chair, which I'm pleased to do with Eliza Ramos. We have posted information about the anti-racism task force and a form that people can fill out if they have comments, questions, or concerns on the district website on the front page. And there are a number of things that we're doing in the teaching and learning arena around anti-racism I just wanted you to be aware of. I've talked about the Touchstones program before that is actually happening in many classrooms, and many others will be starting with that. And what that is it's deliberate coaching on civil discourse. So how kids who might have very different views can listen to one another actively and can discuss without people coming to blows. And then the process of the program has kids looking at readings that have some real heavy, strong issues that people could take multiple sides on. They discuss that, and then every 3 or 4 conversations, they evaluate themselves so that the whole group thinks about how they could be doing this better. A really interesting process. November is the National American Indian Heritage Month. That's the official title. That's presidential proclamation since 2009. And I've sent out materials and suggested resources. Fortunately, they finally, in the world now, there are really good resources. And that is so different than when I started 7 years ago in the district, and I would jump up and down and say, don't tell all that stuff about Thanksgiving. But there wasn't a lot I could tell them or give them instead that were authentic resources written by Native Americans, authorized by Native Americans, presenting and honoring different perspectives. We are charging the social studies teachers to, whenever they are working with American history, whether that is at the 3rd, 4th grade level, when they're studying MDI and MAIN, or in the middle school level, or in the high school level, they have resources that will help them take a look at any event or any time period from at least 3 or 4 different perspectives, including Indigenous, including any BIPOC group, and ordinary people, and the traditional narratives of power. And what we've done is we've challenged people to say, you're not teaching any event or time period without including those multiple perspectives. That's a very deliberate, we provide the materials and that expectation, and I'm really excited to see what the difference is going to be in terms of the social studies program. And I've included anti-racism professional learning options in the last couple 2 professional development times. I'll share some feedback from the one just recently. And these are offerings, and people are taking, more and more of them are taking us up on that. And there are groups at most of the schools now that are peer-led groups that are working to understand more about anti-racism and being anti-racist. So I just want to give a shout out to the teachers who are working with that, and the colleagues and the ed techs, and to all of the learning that's going on, because it's not always very comfortable learning, and people are choosing to walk and really lean into it. Update on assessment. We are working on NWEAs in all of our K-8 schools, including the Virtual Academy program. That is proving to be a real challenge to do NWEAs with kids remotely. In all cases, it's proving to be a challenge because of the schedules and the pods, and but we felt like the potential benefit of having sort of a mark in the sand around where kids are, because we didn't do end of the year testing. And we felt like it was enough into the year that maybe kids were in a groove of learning. So we're giving it a try, and we'll see what kind of results we get. But we're hoping to be able to share results that look authentic to us during upcoming parent conferences. There is a lot of uncertainty about state testing. It's not clear whether that's going to happen as it has in the past. And I don't really have anything else to say except that the state board assessment meeting in the fall, which is usually the meeting that gets ready for all of that, was canceled. So I really don't know what's going on. I'll be meeting with a group on Wednesday, and I should have some more information then. And NAEP testing, which is the national testing, which where Title I schools or schools getting Title I money get included in the national sample. They're greatly reducing the sample. However, 3 of our schools still got asked to do either 4th grade or 8th grade testing. That window is between the end of January and mid-March. Virtual Academy program, 136 kids right now. K-8 from all schools except the Cranberry Isles and Frenchboro. The 8th grade model is like the high school model, and there are 9 students, 4 at Connors and 2 at MDES and 1 at Tremont and 2 at Trenton, who are beaming in with their peers to the classroom the same way that the high school is. All of the others have a dedicated remote-only virtual teacher for those classes. We're trying really hard to balance hands-on and computer times. We've done 2 different deliveries of materials at all the local schools. That's involved Jill and Karen and myself just going all out and delivering things and taking over the office and having packets and bags and all kinds of things. Many of our partners are providing virtual field trips for all of our schools, as well as the Virtual Academy, which is really fun. One of the classes is going to have a virtual field trip from the man at the, who's going to speak about geology of MDI, the person at the Granite Museum. And he's very, very excited. And he actually made a little kit for all of the kids in those classes of different kinds of rocks, and didn't think about how much it might cost to mail those. So we're trying to figure out how to get those to people, not through the mail. Anyway, it's just these challenges that we just didn't anticipate. We really understand that parents and families need support. Parents and families at all of our schools need support. But we're trying to put some, like a parent support group meeting kind of thing. And the first one of those for families in the Virtual Academy, because a lot of these kids are really isolated, is going to be a week from tonight. And our new psychologists are going to be helping with that. There are all kinds of communication challenges, trying to coordinate special services challenges. We're all learning a lot. The teachers have been phenomenal. They've just gone with it all. They're learning a lot about technology. We're all learning a lot about remote assessment and lots of things that we never really were interested in learning, but we know them now. The October 8th and 9th professional days, overwhelmingly more than half of the teachers and ed techs, and I think it was much more than that, that's just based on the responses that I got, took on our own time during the afternoon of the 8th, the morning of the 9th, or the afternoon of the 9th. There was anti-racism work that went on, and people were very positive about that. There was a lot of problem solving with colleagues. There was a lot of connecting with colleagues. These were things that were really appreciated. The workshops that we did provide, and there weren't a lot of them, but they all got very positive feedback. We offered the mandated suicide prevention. We offered how to support our transgender students. We offered a centering in the midst of chaos workshop. That sounds good. A lot of people loved that one. And we did one on assessment analysis and one on the whole child model. And all of them had comments that really meant that they seemed to really be responding to people's needs. But I have to say, I have a whole screen here that you can't see about thank you for the time. And I just want to read just a few because you'll get the feeling of the gist of this. Having the time to slow down, think, and work with others that I needed to work with was invaluable, in all caps. just the time to do the work and touch base with my colleagues. It's been an amazingly time-consuming time. Thank you for allowing us the freedom to do what we needed to do. Time to meet with other staff, time to be in my own room, having the time to meet with students and the time for grading and planning, time to research sound video quality so that I can adjust my lesson plans better to teach my students remotely, time to plan, having the actual time to do it. And the reason I'm sharing that is because again and again, there was appreciation that the board supported teachers to have that time and to thank you again and again. It came right at the right moment, I think, and people were very, very grateful. I just want to close by saying the times we are in, I don't think anyone has to be reminded of the craziness of the times that we're in, whether that's craziness economically or in terms of climate or in terms of politics or on all different dimensions. It's hitting all of us, and I'm sure all of you, very, very hard. We're seeing the effects on parents and families a lot, and I had a meeting this afternoon with the 2 psychologists and Paige Collins, and one of the things we talked about is how can we put more support in place? We got the second psychologist position, and how can we use that position to provide even more support more effectively? And so we're working on a plan for that. Teachers are doing an amazing job, and it's a lot. It's a lot. The teachers here at the high school and in the 8th grade, they're teaching the kids in front of them and the kids on screen, and we're trying to get the right technology setups for the right kinds of teaching that person might be doing. So one person needs a TV and another person needs an extra speaker and another person needs a second iPad and another person needs a stand. And the technology people have been phenomenal, trying to work with each teacher to think about, okay, so do you move around a lot, and where do you have kids, and do you have kids trying to talk to one another, which is another big issue because everyone's talking through masks and everybody's distanced. And it's just a lot to just rethink all of how you do everything and to be also aware of an audience while you're thinking and planning. So it just adds this other dimension of planning, and then you have the physical constraints that you're working with. A very different situation is at the elementary schools where they split the pods up with one person with a small group, and they're there all day with those kids teaching everything. Not all the models look like that, but we have schools where that's what the model looks like. Or we have a model where there's a lot of kids with 2 adults teaching in the cafeteria or teaching in the library. So here we have teachers who are trying to work with all of the physical constraints again, and they're in a totally different space with totally different approaches that are needed. And again, they're doing a great job. The kids are doing a great job. I've been at all the schools. Kids are wearing masks and they're going out and they're laughing and they're playing, and in schools they're learning, and it's a lot. And the administrators, people mentioned, Ingrid spoke eloquently about where the administrators are. And I'm mostly speaking about the building-based administrators, although some of this is obviously also relevant to us here in the central office, but they have been going nonstop without a stop since March 13th. And they're exhausted. And every day, people are coming in with a lot of emotion and a lot of need, a lot of urgency for whatever the thing is that's causing the concern. And so they are just problem solving one after another, after another, after another. So I don't think I just said anything that anybody doesn't know, but it's important just to keep understanding the conditions that we're asking teachers and students and support people and administrators to be working under. And we're very, very, very grateful for your support. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. anyone have any questions for Julie on her presentation?
I have a quick question.
Carry you.
You want me to come down here?
Yeah, when you come down.
So Julie, maybe this isn't on. It is on, okay. First of all, I just want to say thank you for doing the work on the anti-racism task force. It's such important work, and in the midst of everything else that's going on, to be having to focus on that too is, it's just phenomenal that you are finding time to do that. So thank you for that. My question is just, you'd mentioned that staff and teachers are working on anti-racism, different tactics and that. Is anything being done for the kids on that?
So I think that what we're gonna see, with the shift in the social studies curriculum is we're going to see some direct transfer to students. And with the Touchstones coaching, we're gonna see some direct transfer to students. And as the adults become more aware and more cognizant of some of the history that people didn't know, or some of the perspectives that they didn't realize, or some of the ways in which structural racism in this country has made people privileged by circumstance and skin color, what the educators are telling me is that they won't teach the same way again. And so right now, my theory, based on my work in this district, is to just keep inviting and keep offering. And one of the comments that was in the feedback was really telling to me. It was kind of like, oh boy, I guess this isn't going away. I guess I should probably learn something about it then. Kind of expression. And that's my goal, is to just keep offering, just continue to support the groups of people to keep doing things, keep putting very direct statements into my newsletters, and keep raising the issue. And my bet is that the vast majority of our teachers and ed techs will have participated in anti-racism training by the end of this year without mandating a thing.
Great, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, apparently on the agenda, we have next the update on MDIRSS return to school timeline, but that wasn't supposed to be there. It needed to be struck from the agenda. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark for updates from subcommittees, please.
So I'm really pleased to report, I think folks that were there would agree, that we held a policy committee meeting, and that was awesome. We're back at it again with policy, and I think we had a resounding consensus that it was good to meet again, whether virtually or in person, but we will begin a regular cycle of policy committee meetings each month. Prior to COVID, I had reached out to Ann Chapman, who's a policy expert at Drummond Woodson, to really have her take a look at our policies that are in place now, and working with her and Maine School Management to make sure that we have alignment in the policies, and that we've done a review to make sure that we're consistent with not only our mandated policies, but any of the pieces that we would have that are specific to our district or local boards. So if anybody is interested in being part of that group, please join us. One of the things I'll be doing is I'd like to reach out and make sure that we have regular student and staff representation. So I'll be reaching out to see if we can expand that and make sure that we have regular attendance from those entities as well as our associations. I think that's the only subcommittee that I have to update,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. I'll move on to discussion items,
Okay.
which is policy updates.
Yes. So I don't like to use the term boilerplate very often or mandate, but what you have before you are a series of mandated policies. They're policies that we currently have. But as of the 14th of August, 2020, there were adjustments that came forward, both through federal and state statute to ensure that our policies remain in compliance. There are some adjustments that we'd like to bring forward. We're bringing these forward in the areas of affirmative action and harassment. Many of the references you'll see at the policies that we have in place, as well as the policies that we're recommending to you, you'll see have references to either federal law or state statute. So there's not a whole lot of latitude we have in those areas. We did review those policies that are before you. We are recommending that that slate come before you for first reading with the following caveat. There are cross references on all of those policies, and we need to make sure that our policies that we have in place now are in fact all cross-referenced or listed so that we have consistency across the board. We're going through that exercise right now. I'm confident that with the exception of one area, we don't have a policy, I believe, on it's a cell phone piece. Selena broke it out for me. I won't stop there, but there's one policy that is listed in the exemplar. We don't have that policy, and the reason being is that the boards decided locally they did not want to have that policy. So that's not a limitation, but we just need to do the work to make sure there is alignment. So what I am recommending is that this be considered for first reading by the board, and what that would mean is in the month to follow, we'll go through with any of the cross references. We will have another policy meeting, and that if there are no further recommendations or questions, that we would bring it forward at the next AOS meeting for second reading and endorsement. Julie, because if you don't know, Julie is our affirmative action officer and Title IX coordinator for the district. Julie, do you want to add anything to this slate of policies? I mean, you attended that meeting, but is there anything specific you want to highlight?
Can I just say one thing
Oh,
before
sorry.
we do that? For those who have not been here around policy before, what we do is we have a first reading at the AOS, which is tonight, and there's description, if necessary, questions, that sort of thing. It sounds like, in some cases, there might be additional work that has to be done. It sounds like that's the case here. The next meeting, theoretically, the November meeting, then we'll have a second reading and any action is taken then. And so second reading, could be further clarification if there was work done, or just somebody went and digested it and thought about it a little bit further and has more questions, that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
So I'm actually going to be meeting with Jessica Stewart about some of the implications of some of these pieces, because some of these legal pieces, we can't change them, but they have some interesting implications for how we want to be supporting people who have been on the receiving end of the kinds of acts of violation that are explained in these policies. There are a couple of things I'm a little concerned about that I want to get a little bit clearer about, but basically we have to learn how to work humanely and supportively with these policies. We can't change the policy because it's all taken from the legal and federal framework. But for those of you who don't know, there used to be protections for I don't want to say victims or targets, people who experienced the kinds of behaviors that we're trying to regulate through affirmative action in Title IX, harassment of all types. And now those protections have been altered so that it's a lot more public around who has to, who's being accused gets to know fully who's accusing them and what they're saying and all of that, which could have a really chilling effect on whether or not people are willing to come forward. So I guess that's a summary. Do you want to add anything, Jessica, or do you feel like that captures it?
That covers it.
So,
Just to figure out how to word the policy so that it meets the letter of the law, but also meets the spirit of being a safe way for people to report. Correct.
Right, and it may be that our procedures are what needs to be altered, just so that we're just thinking about it proactively.
so to that point, I mentioned the term boilerplate. What is important is that following the law, following the statute, but the educational component will be really important. And making sure our students and our staff are aware how they can bring things forward and work within this framework in a very safe and thoughtful way. Is that correct, Jessica? Pleased to take any questions, and I will add that, forgive me if I forget somebody, but Todd was at the policy meeting, Dwayne, Jessica, Darcy, no, not at that one, and Jim. And I hope I didn't miss anybody, but we have really solid representation from all of our boards at those meetings, and everybody's welcome to join in. Any questions from anybody on that? Again, as Heather explained, this will come back for second reading and any updates, so there'll be another round for anybody that has any questions. Thank you.
All right, we don't have any action items, do we? Nothing that came up? Okay. Other business? Okay. The only, yep. You want to do it? Yeah, I remembered, I wrote it down. We have, over the years, talked about the district and its structure. And, we tend to identify gaps, issues, and COVID has really helped us bring that to the surface again. I think there's been some conversations from time to time. We've met with Bruce Smith, I believe, from Drummond Woodsum, who's done a lot of research for us on what the structure could look like. And we've also talked about kind of getting just an ad hoc group of board members together and sit down and really identify what might be ideal with the information that we have right now, and then submit it to Drummond Woodsum. I think that came up recently in Pematic, and I'm in support of us pulling together this group. Not that anybody wants to be on something else, but the energy's there, and I think the glaring gaps are there. So if there are some board members that are interested in participating in this, you want them to reach out to me? Sure.
So a year ago, this was one of the items that we talked about needing to continue to do work on and try to come up with some ideas about how we could structure our district differently to take care of some of the glaring issues that we have, like 9 budgets and, 9 submissions for different grants and all of this other stuff. And so before COVID came up, that was one of the things that we had on our list of stuff to do. And it came up at our last meeting at Pematic last week. And I have said that I would be willing to kind of lead this group and try to get some of this conversation moving forward. And so I reached out to Charlie Ray. He had been one of our board members who had kind of been in the thick of this conversation. There's been 4 or 5 of us that have been having this conversation along with the rest of the board, I don't know, for at least 10 years since I've been on this board. So, so anyway, if there are any of you that are interested in being a part of that conversation, I think I feel like we could sit down and hash some things out. We all kind of have a sense of what we think our communities would want, what we think they wouldn't want. And so my idea is to kind of come up with a rough structure, send it to Bruce, have Bruce say, yeah, no, that's not going to fly. You got to change these things, and then bring it back to you guys for a conversation. But at least it's a starting point for a conversation. So anybody who wants to participate in that, I see Lily and Carrie. and anybody else who is interested and wants to reach out to me. And we'll try to cobble together, getting together and just kind of, we've got some information from Bruce Smith, some information from Rob Lebo when we changed our structure back when, I don't even, it was back when Governor Baldacci.
Baldacci,
Yes, exactly, right? So Rob had created this Model 5, which I think in many respects is what, in hindsight, we wish we had done. So some of this work, I think, can happen pretty quickly.
That's back in 2005.
Okay, yeah, right, okay, so. So anyway, that's where we're at, and I'll send an email out to the entire AOS board so that you can respond back to me if you have interest, and then, if you can respond back by the end of this week, then we'll try to set up a meeting the following week and just try to get some stuff done so that maybe we have some information back for you guys at our November meeting.
Thanks, Ingrid. And thank you, everybody else who ends up volunteering. Public comments. Yep, if you would just come down, say your name, town. Actually, you could sort of stand this way.
Turn that towards me.
Totally. You want to try this way and then you can face everybody?
Sure. So my name's Patrick. I'm a Bar Harbor resident and a parent. First off, I just want to thank Mark for the communication about the remote schedule that I'd asked about at the last meeting. It was very informative, made me feel better. The other question I had tonight, and I understand this isn't like a back and forth thing, but I heard about asymptomatic testing and using the Jack's donations if there was a positive case. But at the last meeting, my takeaway is that there wasn't any funds for an asymptomatic testing program. But tonight it sounds like maybe there may be some funds available at some point through a grant or something. So I'd just like to better understand how you're going to implement asymptomatic testing without those additional funds. And also just like to point out at the last meeting, there was discussion around positive testing and the use of the Jack's donated tests for people who have already tested positive when those tests can be paid for through other means aside from the donations from Jack's. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll reach out to them.
Okay, great. Thank you, Patrick. And I'm not going to ask again because I think he's the only member of the public. But thanks for being here. Future agenda items?
Well, we'll be coming up on budget season, so that's going to be something that is on our radar, in addition to, I'm very sure, the items we talked about this evening will resurface.
Okay. Our next meeting is Monday, November 9th. I haven't talked to Ingrid, but I like our flip.
I do too.
Yeah. And I'm sure Sarah does too. So we'll just stick with that and have the AOS be the second half of the evening. And then I will take a motion to go into executive session pursuant to MRSA subsection 405, subsection 6D, collective bargaining. Thanks. Second. Those in favor? Okay. It's just going to be a few minutes because I think we have to turn off all of our electronics and whatnot.
The board will stay on the Zoom for executive session.
Okay.